The officer's cap fell to the ground. The busy street froze. Cars honked, pedestrians gasped, but no one dared move. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the young woman standing with fury in her eyes. She had just slapped a police officer. Her words cut through the heavy air like a blade. "Do you know who I am? I am the president's daughter. And no one can touch me." The officer staggered back, holding his cheek in disbelief. Silence followed, sharp and choking. A whole crowd watched, but no one dared intervene. Was this a moment of madness? Or the unveiling of power so raw and unchecked that even the law stood helpless? The question lingered in every mind. What would happen next? Would justice bow to power? Or would power finally be humbled in public? Before we go deeper into this shocking story, don't forget to subscribe and like so you never miss the next twist in this unbelievable tale. The story did not begin here. To understand how the city found itself holding its breath, we must return to the beginning, long before the slap that shook the street. Mary was a young woman living in a bubble of privilege. From the outside, her life sparkled. Lavish cars, elite schools, and bodyguards at her beck and call. Yet inside she lived in a cage made of gold. Her father's position as president made her both adored and envied, protected and watched. She grew up with rules whispered into her ears like chains. Never walk alone. Never speak to strangers. Always remember who you are. But beneath the layers of control, Mary carried something dangerous, an anger that had no outlet. Her mother, Grace, tried to soften her heart with love. Grace would sit with her late at night, brushing her hair and telling her stories of humility, of how power without kindness could destroy not just enemies, but the one who carried it. But Mary was restless. She wanted freedom, yet she hated the ordinary rules that bound ordinary people. One morning, against her father's advice, she left her home in disguise. No bodyguards, no chauffeur. Just herself in plain clothes, walking the busy city streets. For the first time, she felt invisible like any other young woman. The smell of roasted corn, the sound of market women haggling, the sight of schoolchildren running with dusty shoes. It all felt thrilling, raw, real. But thrill quickly met reality. At a checkpoint near the heart of the city, traffic slowed. Police officers were checking vehicles, demanding papers, and questioning drivers. Mary, impatient and unused to waiting, stepped out of a taxi. She thought her disguise would protect her, but she carried herself with a pride that drew attention. Officer John, a man hardened by years of service, noticed her immediately. Her tone was sharp when she spoke, her eyes restless. He asked her calmly for identification, routine and professional. But Mary snapped. To her, it was an insult. How dare a common officer speak to her as if she were just anyone? The tension rose. John repeated his request. The crowd pressed closer, sensing something unusual. Mary's disguise was slipping. Her privilege was itching to burst through her skin. Then, in one blinding flash of rage, her hand struck his face. And that was how the city froze. Now, whispers began to swirl among the people watching. Some murmured, "She must be someone important." Others hissed, "If she gets away with this, then justice is dead." Mary stood tall, unshaken by the shock. She had grown up seeing her father's word become law. She believed herself untouchable. But she had underestimated one thing, the power of a public gaze. And as the officer straightened himself, his eyes filled not just with pain, but with something else, resolve. Would he bow to her name, or would he risk his career, his safety, perhaps even his life to stand against her? The crowd waited. The city held its breath. And Mary's arrogance had just lit a fire she could not put out. The officer's words sliced through the air like lightning. "If you are truly the president's daughter, then today, we will see whether the law belongs to the people, or to you." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some clapped nervously, others gasped, while a few shook their heads, whispering warnings. Everyone knew the weight of those words. To challenge the daughter of the president in broad daylight was not just bravery, it was almost suicide. Mary's face hardened. She had been raised to believe her name was a shield. She had never been spoken to like this, not even by her teachers. Anger burned in her chest, but beneath it was something she hadn't felt in years: fear. "Do you know what you're saying?" she hissed, her voice sharp like broken glass. "You're risking everything." Officer John didn't flinch. His years in service had made him familiar with fear. Fear of criminals, fear of poverty, fear of corrupt superiors. But today was different. Today he wasn't just a police officer. He was a man standing at a crossroads between duty and destruction. He thought of his family. His wife, Marianne, waiting for him at home with dinner always kept warm until he returned. His son, David, just 12, who often said, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be like you, brave." And his daughter, Grace, who had once asked him why the poor always suffered while the rich walked free. His chest tightened. If he let this girl go, what example would he set for them? The crowd grew restless. Someone muttered, "This officer will disappear by tomorrow morning." Another whispered, "He's a dead man walking." John ignored them. He raised his voice. "Madam, you are under arrest for assaulting an officer on duty." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Mary blinked in shock. Arrest. The very word felt absurd. She was used to watching her father's political enemies get dragged away, not herself. "Arrest me." She laughed bitterly, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." She reached for her phone, her hands shaking, and dialed a number. The crowd leaned in, curious, whispering guesses. Was she calling her father? The presidency? The army? Seconds later, a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt near the checkpoint. Four bodyguards stepped out, their eyes sharp, their suits tailored, their presence commanding. The crowd instantly scattered backward, fear gripping them. Mary pointed at John like a queen commanding an execution. "This man dared to touch me. Teach him a lesson." The bodyguards approached, their faces cold, their movements precise. John's heart pounded, but he didn't step back. His hands trembled slightly, yet his eyes burned with determination. The crowd watched, torn between terror and admiration. They knew how these things ended. Ordinary people crushed under the boots of power. One bodyguard grabbed John by the collar, shoving him back against a patrol car. The other officers at the checkpoint froze, paralyzed. They knew that raising a hand against the president's daughter, or her men, could cost them their careers, their families, even their lives. But then, something unexpected happened. John shouted, his voice echoing louder than the chaos. "Citizens of this city, you are my witnesses. Today, power is being used against the law in front of your eyes. If I fall, let it be known that I stood for justice." The words struck the crowd like thunder. For a moment silence returned. People began lifting their phones, recording the scene. Cameras clicked. Videos streamed live. Hashtags began to rise from trembling fingers. Mary noticed. Panic flickered in her eyes. For the first time, her shield of power seemed to have cracks. She turned to the bodyguards, her voice sharp but unsteady. "Take his phone. Stop those people." But it was too late. The crowd had multiplied. Dozens had become hundreds. The checkpoint transformed into a sea of faces, all hungry for truth, all eager to see how far power would go. John struggled under the grip of the bodyguards, but his eyes never left Mary's. "Your father may be president, but the truth belongs to the people. And today the people are watching." Mary's lips trembled. She wanted to scream, to demand obedience, to hide behind her father's name. But the cameras felt like fire burning against her skin. She had grown up in privilege, not pressure. This was a battlefield she didn't know how to fight. Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance. Another convoy of black SUVs sped toward the scene, this one bearing the official crest of the presidency. The crowd parted like waves, fear and excitement mixing. The vehicles stopped, and out stepped a tall, stern figure. The president himself. Mary's father. The crowd gasped as he walked straight toward the chaos. His face was carved with fury, his steps heavy with authority. Every officer on the street saluted instantly. Even the bodyguards froze. Mary's relief flooded in. She ran to him, her voice shaking. "Daddy, he humiliated me. He dared to arrest me." The president's eyes darted to John, then back to his daughter. He clenched his jaw, his expression unreadable. He looked at the cameras, the recording phones, the massive crowd staring at him, waiting. This was no longer just a family matter. It was history in the making. Would he protect his daughter at all costs, or sacrifice her pride to save his name, his government, his legacy? The air was thick. The city was silent. The world felt like it had stopped spinning. And then the president raised his hand. The question was no longer what would happen to John. The question was, what would the president do to his own daughter in front of the nation? The crowd gasped in unison as the president's palm connected with his daughter's cheek. The sound was sharp, humiliating, and unforgettable. Mary staggered backward, her hand flying to her face. Her eyes widened in shock, not because of the pain but because of what it meant. Her father, the man she thought would always protect her no matter what, had chosen to discipline her in front of the entire city. Silence fell like a blanket. Even the bodyguards looked uncertain, glancing at one another, unsure of their next move. The officer, John, frozen in the grip of two men, stared in disbelief. He hadn't expected this. Mary's voice broke the silence, trembling with both rage and humiliation. "Daddy, how could you?" The president turned slowly, his face grim. He didn't shout. He didn't scold. He simply said in a low, steady voice, "You brought shame, Mary. Not just to yourself but to me, to this office, to the people who trusted us." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Others shouted in approval. A few murmured, shocked that power had, for once, bent to justice. Phones were still recording. The slap was already racing across social media, spreading like wildfire. Mary's humiliation cut deeper than any wound. She had always been the untouchable princess, the one who lived above the rules. But now, she was reduced to tears before strangers, her pride shattered by the very hand she thought would protect her. "Take me home," she demanded, her voice shaking. The president didn't respond. Instead, he gestured for the bodyguards to release John. "This officer was only doing his job," he said firmly. "And from today no one, not even my family, is above the law." The crowd cheered. Cameras zoomed closer. This was history unfolding, and every second mattered. But behind the applause, another storm was brewing. Mary's eyes blazed with betrayal. She wasn't just embarrassed, she felt destroyed. She wanted revenge. In her heart, she swore never to forgive her father for humiliating her. What began as arrogance now turned into something darker: resentment. Later that night, the city buzzed with talk. The slap was on every TV channel, every radio station, every phone screen. Hashtags trended globally. Some hailed the president as a hero of justice, a man who put law above family. Others questioned whether the scene was staged, a performance to boost his falling popularity. Inside the presidential mansion, the atmosphere was heavy. Grace, the president's wife, paced the living room nervously. She had begged her husband for years to protect Mary from arrogance, but she had never imagined it would end like this. When Mary entered the room, her face still swollen, Grace rushed to her side. "Mary, my child," she whispered, reaching out. But Mary shoved her away. "Don't touch me. You all betrayed me. You let him humiliate me like that." Grace's eyes welled with tears. "He did it for you, Mary. For your future. If you keep walking this path, you will destroy yourself. This was his way of saving you." "Saving me?" Mary's voice cracked with rage. "By slapping me in front of the whole world. By turning me into a laughingstock." Her fists clenched. Inside she was spiraling. Her pride, her identity, everything she believed about herself had been ripped apart in public. She felt naked, powerless, exposed. Meanwhile, the president sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights from the window. His mind was torn in two. As a father, his heart ached for Mary. But as a leader, he knew he had no choice. He had built his career on promises of justice and fairness. If he had let her arrogance slide, his entire government would crumble under accusations of hypocrisy. Still, doubt gnawed at him. Had he gone too far? Could his daughter ever forgive him? Or had he lost her forever? Across the city, Officer John returned home late. His wife, Marianne, ran to him, hugging him tightly. Tears spilled from her eyes. "I saw everything, John. The whole world saw it. You could have been killed." John sighed deeply, pulling her close. "I thought I was finished, Marianne. When those bodyguards grabbed me, I thought it was my last day. But somehow the truth protected me." Their son, David, peeked from behind the door. "Daddy, you were so brave. Everyone at school is talking about you." John forced a smile, but inside he was troubled. He knew the fight wasn't over. Power never lost quietly. And though the president had defended him today, John feared tomorrow could be different. Days passed, but the incident refused to die. News anchors debated it endlessly. Psychologists analyzed Mary's behavior, pointing to how unchecked privilege could distort a child's mind. Sociologists discussed the power imbalance between citizens and authority, urging parents across the nation to raise their children with humility, no matter their status. But while the public discussed, Mary plotted. Her anger had fermented into something poisonous. She locked herself in her room, refusing to eat, refusing to speak, scrolling endlessly through videos of the slap, each replay a dagger in her pride. Her father had taken away her shield. Now she felt she had nothing left to lose. One evening she finally spoke, her voice cold and steady. "If he thinks he can embarrass me and walk away as a hero, he is wrong. He will regret this." Grace, overhearing her, rushed in, horrified. "Mary, stop this. Don't let anger destroy you. Your father still loves you." Mary glared at her mother, her eyes filled with venom. "Love. He destroyed me. He chose his reputation over me. Now I will destroy him too." Grace's heart sank. She knew her daughter was serious. Mary wasn't just speaking out of hurt. She was planning something dangerous. That night, as the mansion grew quiet, Mary made a secret call. She whispered into the phone, her words chilling. "I'm ready. Do it exactly as we discussed. My father won't see this coming." The blast tore through the morning calm like thunder. Windows shattered. Sirens wailed. Black smoke rose high above the city as the president's motorcade crumbled under the force of the explosion. People screamed, running in all directions. Cars swerved recklessly, trying to escape the chaos. In seconds, the usually busy road turned into a scene of horror. Flames licked the sky, and the smell of burning fuel filled the air. Security agents scrambled, guns drawn, barking orders. "Secure the area. Call for backup." Within minutes, news outlets had picked up the story. Television screens flashed red with breaking news. "Explosion hits presidential convoy. Casualties unknown." The nation froze. Was the president alive or dead? Inside the mansion, Mary watched the scene unfold on her phone, her face pale but determined. Her hands trembled as she clutched the device, but her eyes never left the burning convoy. Her plan had been simple, or so she thought. A single call to the right people, a discreet arrangement, and her father's humiliation would be repaid with his downfall. She never expected it to escalate this far, never expected fire and blood. She thought the convoy would be stopped, delayed, embarrassed, not destroyed. When the screen showed images of lifeless bodies pulled from the wreckage, her stomach churned. She ran to the bathroom, vomiting violently. Grace burst into the room, panic etched across her face. "Mary! Did you see the news? Your father's convoy." But before she could finish, a presidential guard rushed in, whispering urgently. Grace's face drained of color. The president had survived, but barely. At the city's largest hospital, chaos reigned. Doctors and nurses raced against time. The president had been pulled from the wreckage with severe burns, multiple fractures, and shrapnel lodged in his side. He was alive but critical. Medical staff worked tirelessly, their voices overlapping. BP dropping. Prepare the ventilator. We need blood fast. Outside the hospital, hundreds gathered, chanting prayers, holding placards, demanding answers. Some shouted in anger, others wept openly. Soldiers stood guard, rifles in hand, trying to keep order. Officer John stood among the crowd, his heart heavy. He remembered the man who had slapped his own daughter for justice. Now that same man fought for his life. John whispered a silent prayer. God, don't let this country fall apart. Back in the mansion, Grace confronted Mary. Tell me the truth, Grace demanded, her eyes red from crying. What have you done? Mary shook her head furiously. I did nothing. I swear, I didn't know it would go this far. But her trembling voice betrayed her. Grace's heart broke. She could see it. The guilt, the fear, the reckless pride that had led her daughter down this path. You think this is power? Grace whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. You think destroying your own father will heal your pain? You are tearing this family apart, Mary. You are tearing this nation apart. Mary collapsed into a chair, clutching her knees. For the first time, the weight of her choices bore down on her chest. She felt suffocated, crushed. She had wanted revenge, but now she was drowning in it. Still another thought gnawed at her. What if he died? Would I finally be free? Or would I carry this guilt forever? Meanwhile, the cabinet of ministers gathered in an emergency session. The atmosphere was tense, thick with fear. We cannot let the public know how close we came to losing him, one minister said sharply. But the people already know, another countered. Videos are everywhere. They saw the flames. They saw the bodies. A third minister leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. If the president dies, this country will plunge into chaos. We must prepare for the worst. But if he survives, we must show strength, no hesitation. And then came the chilling suggestion. We must find someone to blame. We need a scapegoat before the nation tears itself apart. The room fell silent. I shifted nervously. And slowly, one name began to circulate. Officer John. That night, soldiers stormed John's home. His wife screamed as boots thundered through the door. His children clung to her, crying. John David, you are under arrest for treason and conspiracy against the presidency, a soldier barked. John's heart pounded. Treason. Conspiracy. I stood for the truth. I protected the law. But his words fell on deaf ears. Rough hands dragged him out, chains clinking. His family's cries echoing in the dark. The neighbors watched in silence, fear etched on their faces. They whispered, "So this is how it ends. The man who defied power will be buried by it." Inside the presidential hospital ward, the president drifted in and out of consciousness. Tubes snaked from his body, machines beeped steadily. He couldn't speak, but his mind was sharp, caught between pain and clarity. In his haze, he saw visions of Mary as a child, laughing in the garden, running barefoot with innocence. Then he saw her again, grown, her face twisted with anger, her voice declaring, "Do you know who I am?" Tears leaked from his eyes as he realized the truth. He had lost his daughter long before the slap. He had lost her to power, to pride, to the very system he had created. Grace sat by his bedside, holding his hand tightly. She whispered prayers, begging God to keep him alive. Her heart was torn in two, between the man fighting for his life and the daughter slipping further into darkness. "Lord," she whispered, "don't let my family die this way." Meanwhile, Mary lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. The guilt was unbearable. She had started a fire she could not control. And now John, the very officer who had dared to stand against her, was being used as the sacrifice. Her mind raced. Should she confess? Should she tell the truth? If she did, her life would be over. But if she stayed silent, an innocent man would pay the price for her sins. Her phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screen. It's done. John has been taken care of. No one will trace this back to you. Mary's blood ran cold. She realized she was no longer in control. The people she had called were now pulling the strings. She was trapped in their game, a pawn in something much bigger. Her hands shook as she whispered to herself, "What have I done? What have I become?" The news spread like wildfire. Officer John sentenced to death for attempted assassination of the president. The announcement shocked the nation. On radios, on TV, on street corners. Everywhere people whispered in disbelief. John, the officer who had once stood for justice in broad daylight, was now branded a traitor. The same people who had cheered him days ago now watched helplessly, their voices drowned by the state's machinery. At his small, crumbling home, Marianne clutched her children tightly. Her tears soaked into their hair as she rocked them back and forth. "Your father is not a criminal," she whispered desperately. "He is a good man. Don't you ever forget that." But her children were too young to understand. All they knew was fear. The fear of soldiers bursting into their home again. The fear of whispers from neighbors who dared not speak loudly. The fear of losing the man they loved most. In the crowded prison, John sat on a hard bench, chains weighing down his wrists. The air was damp and foul. Rats scurried across the floor. Yet his mind was somewhere else. Not in the cold darkness of the cell, but with his family. He closed his eyes and remembered the night before his arrest. David falling asleep with a book in his hands, Grace giggling as she told him about her school play, Marianne kissing him goodnight. "God," he whispered, "don't let my children grow up believing their father was a traitor. Don't let lies be their inheritance." His cellmate, an older man with hollow eyes, looked at him and said quietly, "You are innocent, but innocence doesn't matter here. Power writes the truth. And once they've written your story, no one can erase it." John's heart sank, but deep inside, a fire still burned. He refused to die a liar. Back in the presidential mansion, Mary's torment grew unbearable. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The weight of her secret pressed harder every day. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw John's face. His voice echoing, "Your father may be president, but the truth belongs to the people." She had wanted revenge. Now she was watching an innocent man walk toward death because of her silence. Grace noticed the change. She found Mary sitting by the window, staring blankly at the city below. "My child," Grace whispered, placing a hand on her shoulder. "This silence will destroy you. Confess before it's too late." Mary snapped, her voice sharp. "Confess. And throw myself to the wolves. Do you know what they'll do to me if I speak? I'll be ruined. Finished." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "And what about John? What about his wife, his children? Will you let them be ruined for you?" Mary looked away, her chest tight with guilt. Her mother's words cut deep, but fear still gripped her. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the president's health remained fragile. He lay in bed, surrounded by machines, unable to move freely, yet fully aware of the storm raging outside. When he was informed of John's sentencing, his heart broke. He remembered the officer's courage, his words of defiance, his willingness to stand for truth even in the face of death. "Find out everything," he whispered hoarsely to his chief aide. "This doesn't feel right." The aide bowed, but hesitation lingered in his eyes. Even inside the palace, fear had silenced many. Across the city, protests began to grow. At first, they were small pockets of angry youths holding signs that read, "Justice for John," and "Truth cannot die." But soon the movement spread. Thousands filled the streets, chanting, demanding, daring the government to listen. The army tried to suppress them, but the more they pushed, the louder the protests grew. Videos of soldiers beating civilians went viral. sparking outrage even among the international community. The nation was boiling, and everyone knew it. One night, Mary sat in her room, scrolling through videos of the protests. She saw children holding placards with John's picture, their small voices chanting for justice. She saw his wife crying on live TV, begging for mercy. Mary's hands shook. Her chest tightened. For the first time, she whispered to herself, "This is my fault. All of it." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The walls of her golden cage suddenly felt like a prison closing in on her. That night, she crept into her father's study, where Grace sat by his bedside. The president's eyes fluttered open when he heard her footsteps. "Mary," he whispered weakly. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt beside him. "Daddy, I have to tell you something. I made the call. I set it up. The explosion wasn't John. It was me." Grace gasped, her hands covering her mouth. The president's eyes widened, a tear rolling down his cheek. He wanted to speak, but his chest rose and fell heavily, the machines beeping faster. "Why?" His voice broke, barely audible. Mary sobbed harder. "Because you humiliated me. 'Cause I thought I could hurt you like you hurt me. But I never wanted this. I never wanted blood." The president's lips trembled. "My daughter." Before he could say more, the door burst open. 2 bodyguards entered, their expressions unreadable. They had overheard everything. Mary froze, her blood running cold. Grace stood protectively in front of her daughter, but the men's eyes were hard. "Madam," one said firmly, "you need to come with us." Mary's heart raced. She knew what this meant. Her confession had slipped into the wrong ears. The city trembled with unrest. Protesters filled the streets, their chants thundering louder than the police sirens. From rooftops to alleys, from villages to the capital, one name echoed everywhere. "Free John! Free John!" The nation was no longer silent. Inside the courtroom, John stood tall despite his chains. His eyes, weary but unbroken, scanned the crowd. Soldiers lined the walls, reporters filled the seats, and Marianne clutched her children in the front row, her hands trembling as she prayed. The judge raised his gavel. "This court is convened to deliver final judgment on the accused, Officer John, charged with attempted assassination of the president." A hush fell over the room. Suddenly, the heavy doors burst open. All heads turned. Mary entered, flanked by soldiers. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a strange calm. Grace walked beside her, tears streaming down her face. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mary stepped forward, her voice shaking but resolute. "Stop this trial. He is innocent. The bombing, the call, it was me." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, and soldiers exchanged confused glances. The judge banged his gavel furiously. "Order! Order in the court!" Mary's voice cut through the noise. "I made the call. I planned it out of anger, out of spite. John was only doing his duty. He protected my father. He protected the president. Punish me, not him." All eyes turned to the president, who had been wheeled into the courtroom that morning despite his frailty. His face was pale, his breathing labored, but his eyes glistened with sorrow. He raised a trembling hand. "What she says is true." His voice was hoarse but carried the weight of truth. "My daughter has confessed. John is innocent. Let justice be done." Gasps filled the room again. The truth had shattered the walls of lies. The judge, visibly shaken, turned to the soldiers. "Release the accused." Chains fell from John's wrists. He staggered forward, weak but free. Marianne rushed into his arms, their children clinging to his legs, sobbing with relief. The crowd roared, the chants rising again, but this time they carried a different name. "Justice! Justice!" Mary fell to her knees before her father. Her voice cracked. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far." The president's eyes filled with tears. "Mary." Some sins cannot be undone. But perhaps confession is the first step to redemption. The guards moved to take her away, but she didn't resist. For the first time, she felt lighter, as if the burden she had carried for months had finally been lifted. Outside, the protests turned into celebrations. Strangers hugged, people wept, and chants of hope filled the streets. John was carried on the shoulders of the people, not as a victim, but as a symbol, proof that truth, though buried, could rise again. That night, in his cell before being transferred, Mary received a letter. It was from John. The handwriting was steady, the words simple. "You ruined my life, but today you saved it. I will never forget the pain, but I will also never forget that in the end, you chose the truth. May it guide you wherever they take you." She pressed the letter to her chest and cried. In the presidential mansion, Grace stood by her husband's bedside. He was weaker now, his breaths shallow, but his heart seemed lighter. "Maybe," he whispered, "our nation still has hope." Grace kissed his forehead, holding back tears. "Yes, my love. Because truth has spoken." The story of John became legend. His courage inspired a generation. His suffering awakened a nation. And his survival proved that lies cannot kill truth forever. And though Mary bore her punishment, her confession would forever be remembered as the turning point, the moment when silence broke and light pierced the darkness.